Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we are continuing our 12 Makes of Christmas series with a apron using canvas. I like canvas because it's cotton and steel, and some others that we're going to be adding have some really cute designs. They're really funky. They're really great for modern decor and garments. And they also are a little thicker, so they're going to be able to withstand the use and abuse that you get as you do your holiday baking. And they also have these cute little prints. So I'm going to be using this apple one. And then you also need at least 1/4 of a coordinating print. I'm using one of the Cotton and Steel Basics that is a red color to help bring out the little red on the apples. I'm going to show you how to make bias binding to go around the edges, so that way we don't have to hem anything. It's super easy, but you do need a bias tape maker. I'm using 1" one for this project. Of course, some pins, some spray starch. I'm using the new flatter that we have. It comes in different scents. I have the unscented one. And I'm going to teach you how to make this to match your body or the body of the person you're giving it to. So the first thing you want to do is take a tape measure. You want to measure right underneath your bust at the thinnest part of your waist. I know sometimes we think our waist is our belly button, but at least on me, that is the widest part of my waist and not the part I want to emphasize. I want to emphasize where it's nice and trim around here. So go ahead and measure around the thinnest part of your waist, divide that by half, and then add 4 inches. And that is the width that you should cut this to. For me, it was 36 inches around. Divide that by 2, you get 18, add 4 back, and it's 22 inches wide. And then I took my measurement from my thinnest part of my waist to about mid-thigh, and I'm short, so for me that was 16 inches. So measure that on yourself of wherever you want that apron to end up. And since we're not hemming, that is exactly where you want it to be. You don't have to worry about adding in anything for that hem allowance. And then divide whatever that measurement is in half for your pocket. And I'll put all of this in the video description and the blog to go with this below. So if you didn't get all that, you can rewatch it, or you can just click on those links in the video description to get it. So for me, I ended up cutting a piece that is 22 inches wide by 16 inches tall. And then for the pocket, I cut one that is that 22 inches wide by 8 inches tall. So half of the height of my apron. I also have a fat quarter because I'm going to use that to make some bias binding. So go ahead and prep all your pieces, get this cut. And then I'm going to show you how to cut and make your bias binding for really easy hems for your apron. So I'm going to go ahead and take my fat quarter and I'm going to turn that over so that I've now created a 45-degree angle. It doesn't have to be super perfect, but you want to be working on an angle as well as you can be. And you want to try to keep it over your cutting mat, that way you don't have to fuss with anything. Now I'm going to be working with 1" wide finished bias tape, which means I need to cut my strips to 2 inches. So here's how you do that. I'm going to make my first cut on this fold. So for that one, since this is already folded over, I'm just going to line the 1" line up with that fold. I'm going to start down at the very end. Now I got my first 2" piece. So now that the rest of these are not on a fold, I'm going to cut the rest of these at 2 inches wide so that I get 2 strips at a time. All right, so my strips would be pretty tiny if I continued cutting, so I'm just going to leave this to the side, and I've got it if I need more, but I'm probably going to be okay with what I've cut already. So now I need to sew all of these strips together just like I would if I were doing quilt binding. The difference is it's on the bias. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a short strip and a long strip. That way it's not like weird because there's a bunch of short strips all together and a lot of seams to join. But I'm just going to cross them just like this. I'm going to sew from the top left to the bottom right, meeting right in those corners. You can always pin if you want to. And if you haven't ever sewn quilt binding, we do have a video tutorial just on that you can watch. And I am using matching thread. You're not going to see it at this point, but you will when we sew it to the top to edge our apron. So I just wanted to make sure that I've already got it in there and I'm ready to go for the next part. All right, so I'm just going to open that up and make sure I've got a nice straight line, and I do. So you can trim your seam allowances now, or you can wait until you're all done at the end. It's totally up to you. I think I'm just gonna keep on sewing and then do that all at the end at once. So I just did a long strip, so I'm gonna put a short strip on next, and you can see that our edges look really funny, but don't worry, we're gonna trim all that off. So now I'm going to go ahead and trim all those seams off so that I've got a 1/4 inch seam to work with. Then I'm going to go ahead and press all of these seams open. Now, just so that these little dog ears here don't get in the way when I put it through the bias tape maker, I am going to trim them off so that this is nice and even on the sides. All right, so this is a selvage here, but I'm gonna leave it on because it's gonna help me get my piece started. So what you wanna do is you kinda wanna just have a nice angle like this to put it through. It helps you get everything started. And I'm gonna slide it in the bottom of the bias tape maker. And it helps to take a little pin and scooch that down until you can see this part little point out a little bit. And then you can already see it has automatically moved everything over so that I have a perfect 1-inch seam here. And this is where the spray starch is going to come in. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give that a little spritz. I'm going to iron that down to sort of keep it like that. And what you almost can do is you can move it down with your iron. You don't want to do a ton at a time because you want to keep it nice and folded over. Like that. So I'm just really kind of doing a couple inches at a time here to get it started. And once I've gone a little bit of ways, I'm going to do a little spritz. And then really set that good. So I'm going to continue doing this throughout the length of the bias strip until I've done the entire piece. So now here's where the double fold part of double fold bias comes in to play. What you're going to do is fold this over one more time so that the edges we just pressed down are meeting, and we're going to press all the way down. That way we're going to be able to tuck the edges of our fabric in here, and it's going to be super easy to finish the edge off. If you really wanted to, you could spray starch again here, but since we just put a ton of spray starch in there, I think it's gonna hold just fine, and I'm just gonna run through the length of this one more time. All right, I'm gonna set this to the side for now. If you wanted to make it look super cute, you could wrap it around some cardstock, the way they do when you buy this pre-packaged in the store. That's also a great way to store it if you have some extra that when you're all done, so you can use it for another project. So the first thing I wanna do is line the top of my pocket. And to do that, I'm going to cut a piece that is a little bit wider than what I'm working with, and I'm just going to stitch that right on top. Now keep in mind that the start of your piece is not going to be straight. It's got that curve, so make sure when you're trimming that you're taking that into account so you've got a nice even edge. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to open this up, and I'm just going to lay this in right with that fold, and then I'm just going to cover it down and stitch all the way down just with a little top stitch. It's really fast and easy and very easy to do. All right, so we've got this fold here just like I showed you. I'm going to lay the top down, making sure that since this is directional, I've got the top the right side up, and I've just got that tucked right in there. And I'm just going to sew with the fabric, even with the edge of my presser foot and the needle, and I'm going to put it in the first position. That way I'm really just doing a really cute little top stitch here. I'm I'm going to go ahead and reinforce those stitches to get started, just so I've got a really good join. And then I'm just going to kind of open that up and line it up so that the edge of my fabric is all the way to the edge of that fold. And I'm only going to worry about whatever fits on top of my sewing machine. I'm not going to pin everything else in place first. You could do that first if you really want to. Right, so I'm going to line that up again. Get the top of that right even with that fold. And stitch down. When I get to the end, I'm going to go ahead and reinforce those stitches again. And then when you get to the bottom, you just want to double check that you've gotten everything. There's a whole section right here that I've missed where I didn't perfectly turn it over. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and do a second stitch. I'm going to go ahead and move my needle to the center position. And I'm just going to do one extra stitch a little bit further in. It's going to look like a decorative decision, but what it's going to do is just make sure that it's just nice and secure. So from the front, it just looks like I did a double line of stitching, but from the back, what I did was in the areas where it missed, I was able to catch that, so it's not going to pop up, but it also is right next to the edge there and is also going to keep everything nice and flat on the top, so that's good. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cut this off even with the edge and put that to the side. We don't need that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer the pocket on top of the bottom of the other apron piece. So I've got that laid out. I'm just going to lay this right on top. And now I'm going to pin along the sides here and the bottom. And I'm just going to do a little stay stitch about 1/8 of an inch in just to secure all those. It'll get covered by our double fold bias in a little bit, but it'll make it easier to apply it. Just going to put a couple of pins here in the bottom to help keep that together and even as I go. You'll notice that one other benefit of doing this, besides bringing out the little red in the apple, is it also means that because I didn't get this perfectly in line, I didn't match that repeat exactly, it matters less because we've got a nice break there, so you can't tell that this apple doesn't exactly match up with that apple as easily. I did do my best to kind of make it so that the bottom's kind of lined up with the ones on the top, but if you're having trouble getting your repeat, don't worry, this is going to make it a little bit easier for you to have it be a little off and have it not be as big of a deal. So now I'm moving my sewing machine needle as far to the right as I can. That way I'm just taking a tiny little stay stitch in here. And I am going to start just a tad bit above and then just stitch all the way down. This is about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So before I add the bias binding around the edges to finish off the front of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some stitching lines for pockets. Now I ended up cutting mine to 22 inches wide, and so I'm going to measure my pockets in 7 inches. That'll be about 1/3. 21 divided by 7 is 3. So that'll be about 1/3. My center pocket might be a little bit wider, but by measuring in 7 inches from the sides, that will at least ensure that those are nice and even and they look right. So I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm going to line that up 7 inches from the edge. And then I'm just going to mark that with a friction gel pen. This will go away with heat and it'll be covered with a stitching line, so it will work out just fine. Repeat that on the other side. one little precaution to make sure things don't shift on me, I'm just going to go ahead and pin while this is laying nice and flat across those lines that I drew, and that'll help make sure that this stays in line where it should be, and that way it lays nice and flat when we have it on our body. And move my sewing machine needle back to the center position, and I have my needle just above where that line is that I marked, and just above where our binding is. I'm going to go ahead and stitch forward 3 and back 3, and I'm going to do that a couple times just because this pocket is going to get the most of use out of anything here. So I want to make sure it is really secured very nicely. Then I'm just going to follow that line of stitching all the way down. I'm going to cover the line, but again, I'm going to press it later and that will take away that line if anything is showing. I'm not going to worry about reinforcing the seam at the bottom because I'm going to cover that part with my bias binding. Alright, so I'm going to repeat on the other side to stitch down the line from the rest of my pocket. Go ahead and give this a little press to remove any markings from that friction gel pen. Now, just as an FYI, the ink from the friction gel pens will come back if you get it in freezing temperatures, but if you heat it up again, it'll go away. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew all the way around the sides and the bottom of our apron. We're going to attach the top separately at the end. That's going to be our tie. So just like before, I'm just going to start nice and even with the top, and I'll show you how to do that mitered corner. All right, so I'm moving that needle back over to the far left position that we started with. And again, lining up that edge with that fold. Go ahead and tuck that in there and start stitching. I'm now going to reinforce the top because we're going to be sewing another layer of bias over the top of it. So I'm going to sew all the way to the end, and I'm going to reinforce that a little bit and break my threads. Now I'm going to remove it from the sewing machine, and I'm going to fold it so that it's nice and flat against it, and it's going to create some curves or some corners here. So I can go ahead and press the corner over in the front, and it also is going to be pressed over in the back. I'll go ahead and put a pin in this so you can see it a little better. So you can see I now have my miter here, and the miter should be in place back here as well. You can do some fussing with that and move it around a little bit if you want. But that's what it should look like. It should just create that miter, and then we can just keep sewing down. Starting right in that corner, I'm going to sew forward a few and back a few just to get that nice and secured. And then without going too far, I'm just going to go ahead and get everything else lined up because I really just wanted to focus on that corner, and then I'll get everything else put together. You could pin this, you could use binding clips if you are having issues. This is just the way that I like to do it. Let's just tuck it in there and kind of do it as I go along. Once I've made it all the way around, I'm going to move my sewing needle back into that middle position and do a second stitch around so that I'm matching the double seam that is in that center. Now, just like before, I'm going to go ahead and trim this off even with the top edge. So for the bias strip that's going to go around your waist, you want it to be at least twice the measurement that is your natural waistline. 2.5 times would be better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to match up my centers of the bias tape with the background, and I'm going to pin the top of this, because I'm actually going to start sewing just the tape to secure that before I sew anything to the top. So then working from the center out, I'm just going to pin along here keeping this together. My entire top is now pinned together so that I've got equal tails hanging off the sides. Now before I start sewing, I'm going to go ahead and open up that edge. I'm going to fold it in about 1/2 inch or so. And then I'm going to continue doing that bias fold. Just put it back in place. That way I'm eliminating those raw edges. And I'm just going to put a pin in this to hold it. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side before I get started. That way I don't have to fuss with it when it's already on the sewing machine. Now starting with the very end, I'm just going to slide that under my sewing machine foot. And I'm going to move that sewing machine needle to the far right so that I'm just catching those ends. And I'm going to reinforce those stitches quite a bit by sewing back and forward. Just so I know it's really good and secure. Now I'm going to continue sewing down the edge of this strip, just right along that edge line, trying to keep my edges nice and even. All right, now as we come to the body of it, I'm just going to continue sewing just as I had. Just now we're over the apron part of it. All right, now we're just going to keep on sewing all the way down to the end of that strip. Again, making sure you keep those folded edges in line. Right now, as I come to the end, I'm going to pull that pin out, sew all the way to the end, and then again reinforce those stitches, making sure they're going to hold over use. Now, just like we've been doing all along, I'm going to reset my sewing machine so that the needle is now in the center. I'm going to sew one more stitch just to make sure that I've got both of those folds secured and to give it a little bit extra decorative. I'm going to reinforce these stitches this time. This is an extra line of defense. All right, so this is it. I've got my cute little apron. I'll take a couple of pictures of me wearing it so you can see what it looks like on. But it's super cute. I really like it. I really enjoy how choosing that fabric to coordinate with the apples helps bring out that little red in the apples. I've got plenty of fabric left over, so since I can adjust this based on my own body measurements, I can make my daughter one that matches, so that way when we're baking cupcakes together, we can have mommy and me aprons and she can have her own. And I also could even make it for her little doll, although this print would be a little large for an 18-inch doll. But this would be a great project for you and your kids, or you and your grandkids, for when you're having quality time doing baking, or even other crafts, anything where you might get messy or you might need to stow things away in little pockets. These are great for that. Thank you for following along with our 12 Makes of Christmas series. We are releasing new videos every other day here on YouTube. And if you're on our email list, which you can join by going to shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com, then you're going to get a video every single day, because we're showing you some of the videos that we've made over the past year or so that would also make fast, fun gifts for Christmas. I hope you have enjoyed this. I would say probably a good yard or so of fabric for your main fabric, and then a half a yard or so of your binding, and you're going to be fine for any size. Plus you can get maybe a couple of those. We do have this fabric combination over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com, as well as lots of canvas to choose from. You can choose, we have a couple of them on the bolt, and then we have a lot of ones that are available as 2-yard cuts as well. Or you can get smaller quantities if you want, but the 2-yard cuts are great because you could have a whole set of these. You could go and make yourself an apron and a pot holder and mommy and me aprons or grandma and me aprons. It could be so much fun, and the possibilities are really endless. So thanks so much for following along, and until next time, happy quilting.